Adam Smith, the godfather of capitalism, and his communist compatriot Karl Marx, plus Milton Friedman and who could forget Mao. All four of these men can easily agree on one thing, and that's that rent-seeking behavior is a malignant cancer in our society and must be stopped at all costs. I was either going to do a hit piece on Ray Dalio next, or go in on big tech and why Lena Khan couldn't regulate him, but I figured, given the interest, I'd go over some more fun examples of rent-seeking behaviors maligning our modern economies. Before we start, there's definitely some confusion that needs to be cleared up here first. Rent, in this context, refers to economic rent. Specifically, the type of rent you get in excess of whatever costs are associated with whatever you're renting. Rent-seeking is the process by which rent-seekers attempt to extract economic rent in exchange for producing less value than whatever it is they're extracting. Typically, rent-seeking is achieved through distorting the market via political means, but as you'll find, there are many other means by which they may extract that value. Now let's start with the classic example here, the old toll troll. Alright, let's say there's a property owner that owns both sides of a riverbank, and one day he decides to foist up a chain and start demanding payment from passing ships in exchange for the owner to lower the chain and allow safe passage. Now look, nothing new was created except the toll here, right? Nothing productive was done, no new value was created, the river wasn't improved, and boats don't gain anything new from paying the fee. In fact, the fee is just an additional cost of logistics. The price of the fee is going to be priced into the final products caught up in the whole chain, reducing demand and trade, and overall just lowering productivity and economic activity. Overall, a net loss for society, I guess you could say. This old-timey example's rather obvious, right? So let's turn to some more modern and less obtuse ones, eh? Take the play of The Taxi Driver. In the 1930s, there was about 30,000 of them just in New York City alone, and remember, this is back during the true golden age of the 15-minute city, when everything was in walking distance, just like the World Economic Forum intended. And so since there was more taxis than passengers, what happened was all the drivers became destitute and their vehicles rather dangerous. And so to remedy the situation, LaGuardia Airport decided to issue medallions in order to constrict the supply of taxis, allowing the ones that still remained to be able to eke out a living. This saved a lot of taxi drivers from abject poverty, and overall the system was great when it started. But as with every system, with time it started to rot. By the early 2010s, New York was just shy of 14,000 medallions, and remember, this is in an era where cars were much more centric to life. People were walking way less, traveling way further, way more demand, and there was also more people. Medallions themselves were going for about $2 million at the peak there, and this appreciation was all thanks to the artificial supply constraint that the government mandated, and the extortionate pricing power that was afforded to them as a result. Systems like this dominated North America, and as a result, customer service sucked, pricing was through the roof, and everyone generally hated taxi drivers. And that's why when Uber came along, everyone was universally cheering for the downfall of taxis, even though so many families were going into poverty just because the service sucked so bad that we were cheering at the thought of them suffering. That's how bad it was. In fact, I remember when Ottawa was just getting Uber, it was during my first year of university, we got pulled over 2 or 3 different times in September, October, before it was legal, and what Uber would do is actually, they would say, okay, get pulled over, get the ticket, we'll just pay you the ticket on your behalf, Mr. Driver. And eventually, once there was enough critical mass of people like me saying, Uber's amazing, fuck taxis, the city couldn't do anything but legalize it. And so down went the taxi monopoly. And in this case, rent-seeking died off. But if you want to get more abstract here, the root issue behind this was the whole artificial constraint on supply, the licensing, the ability for someone to dictate who can and cannot do something. That is a huge component of rent-seeking behavior today. I mean, look, take healthcare workers, right? Nurses and doctors, the colleges of physicians and all that. Now look, they'll say on all their websites and everything that we don't decide things like seat counts or residency placements or have any control whatsoever. We're all just here, at the whims of the government, but that is not true at all. It's all thanks to collusion between the government and the professional organizations that the government has bestowed the power to control and regulate and manage the profession itself. See, there never had to be a shortage of healthcare workers, right? Unfortunately, they're very expensive, and especially because we have a lot of old people right now, and they did not have enough kids. We need a lot of them, and we don't have enough resources to go around. And in order to reduce healthcare costs, governments sought to reduce the number of slots available for students to study to become healthcare workers. They've also reduced the number of practicum and residency slots as well. They also make students from abroad have to go through all these different tests and retraining periods, even ones that are certified and partnered with Canadian accredited schools. They specifically block those degrees from being able to work within Canada. They say they don't count, you must retest, but because unless you're just fresh out of med school as is, it's pretty goddamn hard to have to go through all those tests again, because the tests, despite testing your knowledge, they don't really prove, for the most part, whether or not you're going to be good and know what you know. We've all been there where we've written tests that are in one ear at the other. A week after writing it, you don't know what the fuck you were saying, right? And as students went abroad to receive sufficient training, they moved to block access for residencies and practicums, even to the point where 100 of what few slots were available went unfucking filled last year. Take that in. We are in a monumental shortage of healthcare workers, and yet we still have 3 digits for slots available to get the practical experience necessary to practice medicine, despite having a dire need and definitely more than enough people to be able to fill those slots. Baffling shit all around. You see, the nursing and doctor colleges were great bedfellows for all this because the artificial shortage of healthcare workers allowed them to protect and artificially inflate wages for decades now. This is all foolish in the long run, obviously, because it overstretches and leads to a lot of burnout with all the healthcare workers that do exist. And it doesn't provide much savings in the long run anyway, but thanks to our societal obsession with short-termism, this is the system we live with. Duncan, what's good?
What's up, dude?
Not much, man. Sorry, you're just admiring my, my thing. What do you think of it?
It's terrific. I'm not sure what kind of mechanism it is. It appears to be a booby trap.
It's a rent-seeking device. It means you have to pay me $5 to enter the main room.
I do have $5 on me.
Thank you.
I don't know if I'm going to take that deal.
Wait, what?
Can I haggle? Can I haggle you down? Okay. You know what? I could part with $5.
That's what I thought. Make it 10. Make it 10.
Wow.
Make it 10.
You know what? I only have a 20, but just take
it. Thank you. And get going.
Truly how rent works.
Goddamn right it is. And you see, these professional organizations are everywhere, and the source of our labor shortages in basically every industry around. If there's an industry with a shortage of workers, I guarantee it's this. I mean, take every single trade, for example, too, right? You think it's because people don't want to get into the trades? Look, especially with the wages that are offered now, people are damn well knocking down the door. In fact, I grew up with people who are struggling to get into the trades despite the massive shortage because there is an artificial cap once again. You need to have an apprenticeship, but no one was willing to do that because what's in it for them? Oh, God forbid you pay it forward to society and do your moral obligation as a member of society. No, screw that. They just refuse to train enough people every year, and even worse, they artificially suppress wages for all new employees. Think of any training or apprentice pay or doctors in residencies or whatever. All of those things have absurdly low wages and long hours, partly because of the same reason why there's so few people allowed to even become them. All the people with the most seniority across all these different professions, all of them say, no, screw everything, screw society, screw even new people trying to become us one day. No, all that matters is me here right now and what benefits me the most. Let's overwork and underpay our youngest people because that means more of the pie gets to me. And we'll just say, oh no, this is just how it is. It's always been. No, all the people at the top with the most seniority, we get the biggest pie forever. And one day you will be lucky enough to have the most seniority. And then you will work less hours and then you will get more money. They conned us into thinking that's normal when it's damn well not. In the long run, they get a bunch of negotiating power and zero risk of job loss or lack of work thanks to their artificial scarcity that they've made. And it's all government sanctioned, remember? You know how many hours, for example, a hairdresser needs to legally be able to cut your goddamn hair? Well, depending on the province or state, anywhere between 1,000 and 3,500 hours. 1,000 to 3,500 hours before you're allowed to cut hair. Do you know how many hours it takes of flight time for a pilot to get their license? 45 fucking hours to fly a plane. And yet, oh no, you want to cut some hair? Yeah, buddy, that'll be 3,500 hours. This is so indefensible. It's not even just the surface level licenses. No, you always see these con artist companies come out of nowhere and legislate their reason to exist. Like, take for example, bartending, right? All across Canada, you legally need to have your Smart Serve to be able to sell alcohol or serve anyone. The Smart Serve doesn't actually teach you anything of value. You see, some guy one day decide, hey, I want a government mandated business for me. You see, I want society to legally require people to pay me money. And so he lobbied the government to say, hey, no, we don't want to overserve people. No, we'll make everyone get a Smart Serve license. It'll help with DUIs and stuff. No, it doesn't. It'll help people with fucking overdosing on alcohol. No, it doesn't. But all that matters is now you must legally go through him to be able to serve alcohol in this country. It's all fake. Genuinely, it's a fake bureaucratic hurdle some fuckhead made up and then successfully lobbied the government to legally mandate mandate every single bartender nationwide pay him money. And even more insidious is the amount of legislated work that gets enshrined into law by people. You know, take CPAs. CPAs do a lot of the above, but they also have legislated themselves into future employment thanks to any accounting materials of any worth that you ever need being legally required to have a CPA sign off on them. It kills me. And the worst part is, dealing with CPAs, you basically tell them what you want. And Christ, you know how many times I've had to go back and say, oh, excuse me, Mr. CPA, you fucked up the very basic, remember, addition and subtraction type shit. You couldn't figure that out. And they're like, oh yes, sorry, no, actually, you're right. Or even worse, they'll try to put up a fight for a bit, and you're like, no, here's the documentation. Again, this was a mathematical error on your part. And they're like, oh. And then they try to punish you in some other area. Jesus, man, no matter what. Need a business loan? Getting audited? Preparing any accounting document of any worth or value ever. No, you need legally a CPA to sign off on it, or else it's just not worth anything. And since there's a shortage, remember, you'll have to be willing to pay more in exchange for getting anything if it's time sensitive whatsoever. Otherwise, you're looking at months on end. It's absurd. And then meanwhile, on the other end, again, just like every other racket, all the new accountants don't get paid shit, and now they wonder, why does no one want to be an accountant anymore? Gee, I wonder. Look, I have a lot more to say about the professional lobbying, licensing, and other racketeering shit that goes on here, but I'll leave it at that for now, okay? Okay, there was a big bread price fixing scandal, also in the late 2010s in Canada. And I remember I got a payout for $25 for Loblaws or something from it. But regardless, that's not what I'm here to talk about today. No, today I want to talk about the way that they price and rent out their space on their shelves. You see, when a grocery store, like let's say Loblaws, you know, going off that example, let's say Loblaws wants to stock some soup. Well, they don't just stock any soup. No. What they do is they auction off that shelf space to the highest bidder. And so Mr. Campbell or whoever the fuck buys out the soup stock. They get their SKU listed and it's on the shelf. You see, but then slowly over time, Loblaws starts eating away at their margins. They start ratcheting up the fees, then they extend the payment terms. Oh, you want T plus 30? I'm thinking T plus 60. Wait, no, T plus 90 now. And then they demand you get into this useless ass marketing program, which, let's be real here, okay? Contemplate the last time that you've ever looked at a flyer from a grocery store, okay? It goes straight into the trash, as it should, because it's trash. But yet they make these guys pay for it, because the margin on these grocery store flyers that they con you into getting, it's insane for them. It's just free money. The only cost is just the paper it's printed on and our Canadian government postal service that subsidizes this bullshit for some godforsaken reason. But regardless, at the end of the day, over time, through all these programs and fees and recalculations, eventually your margin's eaten away to the point where you can no longer feasibly fund the actual operations of your business if you continue to go through Loblaws or whoever the fuck, right? And so you gotta say, okay, Christ, I need to chill. But the issue is they're a monopsony, right? It's like a few companies who control all of the demands through having the few physical locations where groceries are required in this country. And so because of that, they can turn around and say, I'm going to be all of your customer, basically, because there's only a few guys to go with to begin with. And then on top of that, the amount of volume they move mean that they're going to be by far your number one source of revenue. And so when you try to get off them, it's like leaving heroin. It's like quitting meth, because now you're stuck. You've just got so hooked to this teat of zero margin revenue that you can't feasibly get enough customers to replace that big one. It's a monopsony. And so because they're a big buyer, you can't afford to sell to them at the current margins, but you also can't afford not to sell to them either. That's how they get you. Meanwhile, you aren't even allowed to suggest to them an MSRP because they want to come up with it internally. And if you suggest something to them, now they can't claim it's the MSRP, is it? And then on top of that, they squeeze every drop of margin out of you. And it's so funny because this whole time, through all these different efficiencies and constant supplier bankruptcies the grocery stores leave in their wake, you'd expect, well, Christ, maybe surely this could lead to lower prices, right? Are you fucking retarded? No. If you lower prices, no. Higher profits is what I'm thinking. Oh my Christ. Welcome to the age of the aggregator, a new type of business that's come to both dominate our economies and attention. I'm not going to go in on aggregators today, but needless to say, their time in the sun has had their gilded asses glistening, okay? Take Amazon Marketplace, north of $600 billion in net revenue last year. Amazon's over 40% of the US e-commerce market alone. While the Wild West of the 2010s has been pretty fruitful for both suppliers and dropshippers alike, the 2020s has been rather dismal so far. Amazon does a lot of things that should be stopped, like their bestsellers Amazon Basics copycat product scheme, or their extortion of suppliers to prevent products from being priced cheaper off-site than it is on Amazon. But today I really want to focus in on that algorithmic rent. You see, when you list a product on Amazon, you'll quickly find that competitors and competing products start to buy ads for your direct company and product name. This happens on Google and elsewhere too. But regardless, the fact remains that you must now outbid other companies just to retain the top slots for when people search specifically for your product or company. Look, this is absurd, it's indefensible, and it's annoying to navigate as a customer, and needlessly results in higher prices to offset marketing costs for suppliers, just so that Amazon's search function doesn't self-harm and degrade the overall experience for everyone involved. Since ads are a zero-sum game and no net benefit is generated, at best, it's a payment to artificially redistribute outcomes from one supplier to another, which is a classic case of rent-seeking. Paid search results cost over 20% more than their organic equivalents, and since people tend to default to the first listings, these companies are rewarded for participating in this rent extraction racket. Honestly, defaults are a huge component of these aggregators and new technopolies. Keep an eye out for the Lena Khan video to hear more. Consumers are harmed by the added time and suboptimal choices from all this, as while Amazon used to prioritize the best products in their search results, now it's just recommending whatever products have the most dry powder for ad spend behind them. We all know products that suck but get by on marketing alone, right? And even worse, you'll often find you search for something and the first 4 results are the same damn product listed 4 separate times. And remember, with half of all US adults starting their product search for anything on fucking Amazon apparently, the sum cost of all of this is monumental for society. The only beneficiary of this racket is Amazon at the end of the day. The only reason they can get away with all this is because they are an aggregator and our regulations have not caught up with how to deal with these type of companies. Our regulatory environment for all this is akin to the 1880s before the Sherman Act was adopted. I went to high school with a cute girl that had a pretty name and whose parents owned a car dealership. I wonder what she's up to these days. Hopefully not watching this segment because I'm about to shit on legally mandated middlemen. Because you see, there's many examples of the legally mandated middleman around, but the most atrocious yet common, or at least the one that sprung to mind first and foremost, was the modern car dealership business model. Because you see, car dealerships started off as a good solution to the triopoly infesting car manufacturing. You see, between Ford, GM, and Chrysler, they were able to completely command the market. And so to fix this, the car manufacturers were no longer allowed to go direct to consumer. On top of this, they were not allowed to sign any exclusivity contracts with any dealerships, nor could they lump on a bunch of other requirements for all these dealerships, like carrying a bunch of spare parts just in case a consumer came in with a broken car model just so they could have an immediate turnaround time on repairs. At first, this helped the car market since car manufacturers were now forced to compete and actually give better deals and incentives and prices for consumers. But of course, as with everything in life, over time the system started to rot. Because you see, laws exist now that prevent new dealerships from being opened, meaning that there's no real competition for existing dealerships anymore. And on top of that, all warranty repairs must go through these dealerships, meaning that they don't gotta give a shit about customer service. And so that's why your wait times are so goddamn long to get a repair done on your cars. And also, the repair job's shoddy, and it seems to conveniently always make you have to go back at regular intervals just to get something new fixed. And to top it all off, no matter how good or bad any dealership does, they are not legally allowed to lose their license to sell cars. Any car manufacturer is stuck with the dealerships they got. They are not legally allowed to stop or step in and prevent shitty customer service. By law, legally, car dealerships are allowed to fuck you, and there's nothing anyone can do about it, because after all, it's a local monopoly. What are you gonna do about it? Go elsewhere? Get fucked. And so car dealerships, being middlemen, especially ones legally enshrined into law, have of course raised the cost of new cars to the end consumer precipitously, to the shock of no one. Mind you, this isn't a whole one-sided affair, right? Car manufacturers still do benefit too, like getting all the financing off their books, sticking all of the dealing with the customer shit onto some other guy, stuff like that. But of course, the only one to truly lose across the board is, as always, the end consumer. When is it not? And to end off this segment, I just want to state, fuck Tesla, fuck Elon Musk. But to be clear, I do appreciate Tesla and their efforts to go over the top, so to speak, and go directly to consumers, regardless of what the local laws say. Now look, I don't want to be all doom and gloom here, so let me end off with some positive examples of rent-seeking behavior, okay? First, consider Hong Kong's land auctions. There's a great Polymatter video on this. Hong Kong has, or had anyway, record low taxes. Their top tax bracket was about 16%, which is insanely low. The average citizen in Hong Kong had an effective 2% tax rate, for fuck's sakes. There was no sales tax, there was no capital gains tax, inheritance tax, estate tax, any of that shit. Despite all this, their public services and infrastructure were top-notch. Now, how did they pull that one off, huh? Among other things, they heavily restricted the supply of land. Now, you see, Hong Kong doesn't have much land to begin with, but what land they still had for development was held back. You see, instead of developing it all immediately, they would portion off tiny parcels of land each year and auction them off. This was objectively rent-seeking behavior, but unlike most examples, it was the government doing it on behalf of society. While citizens did suffer from the artificial housing shortage it did induce, they did benefit immensely from the low tax environment and the high investment in public services and infrastructure. As we enter the 2020s, the mainland government ruined this system by ruining Hong Kong and their democracy. On the whole, was the strategy a net positive for Hong Kongers? Was it a net loss? Look, I'm not one to judge. What I will say is it indisputably did have a lot of benefits for society. Want another one? How about oil royalties in Canada? You know, big oil companies want to extract oil wherever it may be. Canada has a lot of oil, and a lot of it on federal lands. Rather than let oil companies take all the profits, Canada and the provinces decided to establish a royalty system for allowing oil companies access to these resources. Newfoundland famously told oil companies to go frack sand unless they wanted to give huge royalty and equity concessions to Newfoundland in exchange for the right to extract their offshore oil reserves. Everyone called Danny Williams, the premier of Newfoundland at the time, and the absolute goddamn GOAT, a madman. They called Danny Williams a madman for trying this, saying it was going to have a chilling effect on oil companies' desire to extract from Newfoundland. And then sure enough, months later, the oil companies came crawling back like the little bitches they are, and then they begrudgingly accepted a very favorable deal to Newfoundland. As they should, as they always will, because at the end of the day, you got the oil, you don't want it today, fuck off and come back tomorrow when it's worth a lot more and you gotta give me a lot more. We can sit on this as long as it needs. It sat in the ground for millions of years. Sit millions more for all I give a fuck. God, I love Danny Williams. Because you see, whenever the government has a monopoly on key resources, right, they can extract large economic rents from all these private companies in exchange for the right to extract them. Because at the end of the day, they have value and there's a lot of margin to be taken. And if we're gonna allow private companies to go and shit up the place, which they always will, we may as well get some benefit for it, right? Otherwise, why are we letting them? What's the point? Now, what the country and each province decided to do with all of these oil revenues varied significantly. You know, take Alberta, for example. They actually had a sovereign wealth fund for their oil revenues over a decade before Norway did, eh? But, of course, they shot themselves in the foot by halting all contributions early on and then stealing any returns every year, ruining the ultra-long-term time horizon advantage that all these sovereign wealth funds are supposed to have. That's why today, Norway has $1.7 trillion, literally north of 200K per Norwegian. Meanwhile, the Albertan Sovereign Wealth Fund peaked at 12.5K per Albertan back in 1983, and now it's about 4 to 5 grand per Albertan today. If only the elderly Albertans that exist now didn't get so greedy and decide to rob today to pay for yesterday, Albertans today would have had north of 200K per person instead of the paltry 4 to show for it. The yearly returns of their wealth fund alone would have been more than the entire province's budget at this point. Imagine a world where Alberta today had 0% taxes on anything. This is the world they stole from you. Anyway, that's all I gotta say today about rent-seeking behavior. It's everywhere, it's a malignant cancer, but it's not always gotta be all bad, right? Now, subscribe, or I'll tell your landlord to raise your rent. And you better be tipping, bud.